Welcome back to this week's episode of Last Words presented by The Pit. I'm one of your co-hosts, Doc Coyle, guitarist from Bad Wolves and host of the X-Man podcast.
I'm Katy Irizarry of Season and Miss, Loudwire, and Outburn Magazine.
I'm Zeena Koda of Hell and Everything's Political podcast.
And our guest this week is Chase Mason, the vocalist from the band Gatecreeper. Welcome to the show, Chase.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Right on. Well, you guys just put out a record entitled An Unexpected Reality. We talked about this, I want to say, last week. Well, one of the things we talked about with this record was just the challenges of putting out a record during a pandemic. So what has that process been like? Why put a record out now? Why not wait 6 months?
The record, it was written and recorded during the pandemic, and it kind of was a result of the pandemic. We had kicked around the idea to do a record that was, as far as the music, stylistically a little bit different than what we were doing. We had a whole year of touring ahead of us, so we didn't think we were going to have time to do it. So once all the touring got canceled, we were just like, let's make it happen now. If anything, the pandemic made it easier for us to at least get it done.
Me being in a band and thinking about the idea of putting out a record but not being able to tour on it is a little bit scary. Are you worried that it won't get the kind of attention, or is it a thing where maybe there's less records out now because bands are avoiding that, so maybe you get a little more coverage or attention?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, the whole thing, just the way that we went about every aspect of it, we did things a little bit differently, just trying some new stuff out. Like for the songs, it's split up basically the fast side of the record and the slow side of the record, which was different for us. And then the way that we released it being a surprise, like without having the big long rollout, we were risking, not being able to get as much of hype going for it, or, you missed the pre-release album cycle, or, like cutting short your window that you have for first week sales for your numbers or whatever it is. On the other side, like you said, there's not a whole lot of bands putting out records right now. And especially even in normal times at the beginning of the year, it's still kind of a little bit slow. But I think that it worked out really great because the plan was to try to use to our advantage the kind of reality that we live in, that we found ourselves in, where everybody's just constantly barraged by all kinds of different things, and we're all on our phones all the time. And, I think it's harder to hold people's attention because everyone's just like, every day there's something new happening something crazy happening in the world, over the past year. So we kind of banked on just like putting all of that hype or excitement into just like one consolidated or concentrated day or week. The day before we said, hey, this is coming out. And I think it worked out because we didn't have to hold people's attention for too long.
We have something else to talk about. There's a civil war going on in the heavy metal scene. All right. Are you team clean singing? Are you old school? Or are you dirty singing, screaming, heavy?
I like the term civil war. That was extreme, brah.
There's a blog called No Clean Singing. All right.
Yeah.
It's real in the streets.
No, but then they do actually cover bands that do in fact do clean singing.
Well, then they're liars.
Chase, what are your thoughts on the big dilemma, clean versus not so clean vocals?
Obviously, I don't do clean singing in my band. I couldn't if I wanted to. Maybe that's why I don't. So I wouldn't say that I take either side. I think that they both are just as cool. But my opinion on that is that I think that you should keep them separate. I call them the good cop, bad cop vocals. Yeah. But I think that they should be separate. So like if it was a band, just do clean singing. And if you're not going to do clean singing, just do whatever you want to call it: screaming, growling, dirty singing, heavy vocals. But that's my stance on it, is that separate but equal.
In certain aspects, I think it works really well. But then there's definitely other bands out there where it's like, ooh, yeah, this just killed the vibe. For instance, what actually comes to mind is Lacuna Coyle, because I feel like it's like, all right, what are we doing with this hype man here? He's adding nothing to the bands. It's not the early 2000s anymore. Like, let's just get 100% of the vocal duties. Give that guy something else to do. I don't know, but like, what are we doing here? This is not working out for me.
Come get your mans. No, I actually didn't even think about the topic that way, but I don't know. It's hard to separate the two because you're right. Some people do it well. And I think Opeth is an amazing example. But then when I'd rather hear a melody. So it works for me better to have like a singing vocal just because I'm like a slave to the melody. You know what I mean?
This is one of the topics I have some of the strongest opinions on. Okay, first off, let's get something out of the way. All right. No such thing as clean singing and dirty singing. There's singing. We know what singing is, and then there's screaming or growling, right? Mm-hmm. The default for metal is not screaming. So you can't, metal started with Judas Priest and Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden. So don't be telling me that now we have to define singing as screaming, because it's not. There's singing and there's screaming. That's the first thing. Second thing, of course it belongs together. Fear Factory, Dimmu Borgir, Slipknot, Killswitch Engage, Poison the Well, Vision of Disorder. I could name 5,000 bands that mix singing and screaming. It's just, is it good? Do you do it well? If you're bad at singing, then don't do it. If you're bad at screaming, don't do that. So I don't think it's really neither here nor there. I think it becomes kind of like a posturing credibility virtue signal of like, I'm into this, and it becomes about siphoning off and saying, well, I'm into this kind of thing, I don't like this kind of thing. And I think it creates more division and like instead of unity. It's like, well, I don't like those kind of bands because, like I said before, the term good cop, bad cop was invented. Fear Factory existed. Was that good cop, bad cop? No, it was just a cool band that was versatile.
I don't disagree with you. You know, I wouldn't do both in my own band. And, you know, I played bass in a band, Spirit Adrift, for quite a while. And it's totally clean singing. So, you know, I've played in both type of bands. I think it's kind of an immature thing, but like the term like sellout, you know, so I think that some bands that say that they're a death metal band or whatever, and they only have growling vocals, and then you incorporate the singing parts, like say you have the choruses, or even if it's on a record, only a couple songs, you know, they bust out the singing for a chorus. I think it automatically gets labeled as like, oh, they're trying to be more accessible, or they're selling out. I don't think that selling out is a real thing. I do think that it is more accessible, and then that is valid, and there's a place in the world for that. Because I know when I was getting into heavier music, I did like the bands that had good cop, bad cop vocals, because it was a good like entry point for me. It was a mix of both the things, so it was like a good gateway for me to get into the heavier stuff. So I understand the appeal of it, and I do think that it's a valid style, but I personally wouldn't do it in my band.
You know, it's interesting because I think you bring up a good point where people tend to get particularly upset. Not in general. I don't think there's necessarily a very strong stance of I prefer this or that, but I think they really get upset when a band that's traditionally death metal doing death metal vocals suddenly just starts doing clean vocals. And even if it's to a very small degree where it's just like an accent or once in a while in a song, or they totally flip it like Gojira did, you know, something like that. People, that's when I see the most backlash and the most anger about this topic. It's the idea of change, which I think in general kind of applies to the genre as a whole. When you see a band that suddenly undergoes a drastic change, people are either totally with it or totally against it. And sometimes it works great, you know, for a band like Carcass, for instance, or Death. But there's other times where it totally falls flat, like Suicide Silence. You know, they went like this total Deftones type of vibe, and that I think received a lot. That's probably, in my recollection, the most backlash I've seen over a band changing sound and vocals like that.
But it's such an asinine immature. I agree that it's kind of immature and like short-sighted, because think about it. If you're in a band for like 20 years, right, you're going to get bored of doing the exact same thing over and over again. And you want to flex some of your musical ability in a different way. And like, there can be heavier vocals that are screams. I don't want to offend Doc, that have the complementary musical groove and melody that make it fit in the right pocket. You know what I mean? So I do think it's like good or bad. Like, does your sound as a vocalist work for your band? And are you complementing each other in the right way? You know what I mean?
So I want to kind of make a point off that about kind of the skill set. Like, I actually think what's happening in the modern times is that you need more skills to be considered great. And the same thing's happening in hip hop, right? Like where it's very rare now that a new rapper comes out that only raps and doesn't sing. And I feel like,
thank you, Drake.
Yeah, exactly. Or Kanye to a certain degree. I think in metal, it's like that too, where if you're a vocalist that can only do one thing, I think sometimes, like, for example, I'm going through right now, we're looking for a vocalist for my band, and we need someone that can do a broad versatility of skills, and there's just not many of those people out there. Well, thanks to all of you for checking out this episode of Last Words. Chase, where can the people find you?
You can find me, unfortunately not on stage anytime soon, but on social media, Instagram, Twitter, and all that. It's Hella Hammer. For Gatecreeper, we are going to be doing a live stream, so you'll be able to watch us from the comfort of your own couch or wherever it may be.
Right on. Thank you for being on the show, and all you people go check out the Gatecreeper stuff. Katy, where can people find you?
Twitter and Instagram at Merciful Kate.
And Zeena?
You can find me at Zeena Koda, 2 E's, don't play me, everywhere. Holler at me.
And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at .Coyle. And if you want to follow this show, Last Words, you can follow us on all platforms at We Are The Pit. And if you like what you saw here, please go check out the entire unedited podcast. It comes out every Thursday on all the places where you find podcasts. And you can hear us talk about albums. You can hear us argue more. You can hear us talk more. It's amazing.